Okay. Hopping into the hand muscles. We'll start with abductor pollicis brevis, which originates at the scaphoid bone of and trapezium and the flexor retinaculum. It inserts at the thumb, the base of the proximal phalanx, via radial sesamoid. The innervation is caused by the median nerve coming from C8 and T1, and the actions are CMC joint of thumb abduction. Next is the flexor pollicis brevis, which originates at the superficial head. The superficial head comes from the flexor retinaculum, and the deep head comes from the capitate bone and the trapezium. It inserts at the thumb, the base of the proximal phalanx, via the radiosesamoid again. The innervation is caused by two things. The superficial head is caused by the median nerve coming from C8 and T1, and the deep head is caused by the ulnar nerve coming from C8 and T1. The action is CMC joint of the thumb flexion. Then we have Opponens pollicis. It originates at the trapezium. It inserts at the first metacarpal, the radial border. The innervation is caused by the median nerve C8 and T1, coming from C8 and T1. And the action is CMC joint of thumb opposition. Then we have adductor pollicis, which originates from two spots. The transverse head originates from the third metacarpal, the palmar surface of it, and the oblique head originates from the capitate bone, the second and third metacarpal bases as well. Innervation is caused by the ulnar nerve coming from C8 and T1, and the action is CMC joint of thumb adduction and the MCP joint of thumb flexion. Then we have abductor digiti minimi. It originates from the pisiform bone. It inserts at the fifth proximal phalanx, the ulnar base, and dorsal digital expansion of fifth digit. Excuse me. The innervation is caused by the ulnar nerve coming from C8 and T1, and the actions are MCP joint of little finger flexion, abduction of little finger, PIP and DIP joints of little finger extension. Next up is the flexor digiti minimi. Great one as well. It originates at the hook of hamate and the flexor retinaculum. The insertion, it inserts at the fifth proximal phalanx base. The innervation is caused by the ulnar nerve coming from C8 and T1, and the action is MCP joint of little finger flexion. Next up is Opponens digiti minimi. It originates at the hook of hamate and flexor retinaculum as well. It inserts at the fifth metacarpal, the ulnar border. Innervation is caused by the ulnar nerve, C8 and T1 is where it comes from. And then the action is that it draws the metacarpal in a palmar direction. Opposition is what it's also known as. Then we have the dorsal interosi. Dorsal interosi. I don't know. It originates at the adjacent metacarpals 1 through 5. It inserts at the dorsal digital expansion of digits 2 through 4 and the proximal phalanges 2 through 4. It is innervated by the ulnar nerve coming from C8 and T1, and the actions caused are the second to fourth digit MCP joint flexion, the second to fourth digit PIP and DIP joint extension, and the abduction from the third digit. Then we have the palmar interosi. It originates from the second metacarpal, the fourth metacarpal, and the fifth metacarpal. It inserts at the dorsal digital expansion digits 2, 4, and 5, proximal phalanges 2, 4, and 5 as well. The innervation is caused by the ulnar nerve, C8 and T1, and the actions are second, fourth, and fifth digit MCP joint flexion, second, fourth, and fifth digits DIP and PIP joint extension, and then adduction toward the third digit. Then we have the lumbricals. It originates from the tendons of the flexor digitorum profundus. it inserts at the dorsal digital expansions digits 2 through 5. The innervation is caused by the first and second part is caused by the digits. The first and second digit is from the median nerve C8 and T1, and then third and fourth is coming from the ulnar nerve C8 and T1. The actions are for the second and fifth digits MCP joint flexion, PIP, and DIP joint extension. Next up is the synergists muscles for the forearm and hand. So, starting with the elbow, the humeral ulnar and humeral radial joints. With flexion, we have the biceps brachii, the brachialis, the brachioradialis, the flexor carpi radialis assists, the flexor carpi ulnaris assists, the palmaris longus assists, the pronator teres assists, the extensor carpi radialis longus assists, and the extensor carpi radialis brevis assists. The extension is only caused by the triceps brachii, all of the heads, and the anconeus. We use a lot more things for flexion than we do extension. I guess because our arms don't extend that far. Then for the forearm, proximal and distal radio-ulnar joints. With supination, we have the biceps brachii, the supinator, and the brachioradialis assists. And then pronation, we have the pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and the brachioradialis assists. Oh, jeez. All right. Now with the wrist, which is the radiocarpal joint, I'm assuming that's what that is meant to say. Not radiocrapal joint, radiocarpal joint. Extension is caused by to extend, we have the extensor carpi radialis longus, the extensor carpi radialis brevis, the extensor carpi ulnaris, the extensor digitorum, which assists, and the extensor indicis, which assists. And with flexion, we have the flexor carpi radialis, the flexor carpi ulnaris, the palmaris longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor digitorum profundus, which assists, and the flexor pollicis longus, which assists. Then with abduction, which is radial deviation, we have the extensor carpi radialis longus, the extensor carpi radialis brevis, the extensor pollicis longus, the extensor pollicis brevis, the flexor carpi radialis, and the abductor pollicis longus. Then with adduction, which is ulnar deviation, we have the extensor carpi ulnaris and the flexor carpi ulnaris. And then finally, with the thumb, which is the first carpometacarpal and metacarpal, what the fuck is that word? First carpometacarpal and the metacarpal phalangeal joints. I got it. So for flexion, we have the flexor pollicis longus, flexor pollicis brevis, the adductor pollicis assists, and the palmar interosi first assists. I don't know what that necessarily means. Then with extension, we have extensor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, abductor pollicis longus, and palmar interosi, the first, and it assists. And with opposition, we have the opponens pollicis, the flexor pollicis brevis, which assists, and the abductor pollicis brevis, which also assists. And now we are done with the forearm. Take a water break. Take a break.